Good morning. I'm Dr. Moosally, and I teach in the English department here at UH Downtown. And I teach history of the English language, I teach linguistics, I teach editing, and I also teach composition occasionally, as well as technical writing. So my area of specialization is actually in the study of language. And so the GRE verbal section is all about language. And so this morning we're going to talk in two parts. First, I'm going to talk a little bit about the test in general. And I really think that that is a critical element for you. Understanding how the test works is your strongest strategy in being successful on it. So we'll talk about what the test looks like, especially since it's a new format that they just opened in August. And then we'll talk about the verbal section. And mostly that's going to be about building vocabulary. That's really what your focus needs to be. If you do have questions at any time, feel free to raise your hand, and I will remind you to use the microphone as we go through this. You have a handout. I think everybody should have a stapled handout. I'm just going to kind of talk through it, but I'll add a few things as we go along. First of all, the GRE is a standardized exam. That has its pros and cons. I'm sure all of you have taken standardized exams, and we all know that they have a particular structure that is predictable, which is one of the best things about it. So we can know exactly what the test will look like before you have to take it. The more comfortable you are with the exam format, the better off you will be. It tests acquired skills. This is not an intelligence test. So please be comfortable knowing that when you go in, what you are testing is the acquired skills, skills that you have learned presumably through your education and your life experience, and that is what the test can tell us. It cannot tell us your intelligence level. We need to keep those separate. Everybody has good and bad test days. We all know that all kinds of performance issues affect how well you can do on the exam, so keep that in mind as you plan for when you're going to do it. Try to do it at a time when you're not stressed out. Make sure that you have plenty of sleep and all of those good basic prep tools. The new exam has 6 sections, and the total length for the exam is 3 hours and 45 minutes. It is a grueling exam schedule. You need to be ready for that. They have approximately 1 minute break between sections. So realize that it's a 4-hour deal, and you need to get there early to register and get comfortable and know where you are. So it's so important to be ready to go. If you're not ready to go, that whole day is going to be really tough. So 3 hours, 45 minutes. It's broken down as it says there on the handout. There are 2 verbal sections. They are each 30 minutes and 20 questions apiece. There are 2 quantitative sections, 35 minutes, 20 questions apiece. There's 1 analytic writing section, which is 60 minutes, but it's 2 separate 30-minute sessions where you write an essay in each. So you'll write 2 different types of essays, and Dr. Kemse Tong will be talking about that a little bit later. And then there will be 1 other section that is either an experimental section or a research section. If it is a research section, it will tell you that at the top, and you don't really have to do your best on that if you don't feel like it. However, if it is an experimental section, you will not know which sections count. So you might end up with 3 verbal sections, only 2 of them will count, but you will have no idea because the experimental one will look exactly like the others. So don't try to guess. Don't say, oh, I think this is the one I can slack on, because you have no idea. You could get 3 quantitative sections. There's just no way to know. The reason they need to do these experimental sections is because they're testing questions for future tests. Because it's standardized, they have to norm the questions and make sure that they know kind of what the general responses will be. So you will be getting an extra section. Just make sure you try your best on all of them. The scores have changed. It used to be scored from 200 to 800 on the verbal and quantitative sections. The scoring has now changed to be from a scale of 130 to 170. They think it better matches the percentile ranks, which you will also get. So you'll get your score, say 150, and then it will be matched to a percentile rank of, say, 80%. And that tells the people who look at the scores where you fall in relation to all the other people who have taken the exam. And it's not necessarily just the people who have taken the exam on that day. As the Kaplan book says, just in case you get on a day when there are a bunch of rocket scientists taking that exam, they don't want that to be skewing the data. So they actually look at a whole bunch of people who have taken the exam over a period of time. The analytic writing section is scored on a 0 to 6 scale, and you will get a 0 to 6 number on each of the 2 sections that you write, and that will all be reported as part of your scoring. All right, so in terms of the test strategy itself, what does the test look like? What's going on with that? It's what's called a multi-stage test, MST. It used to be a computer adaptive test, a CAT, and that was much more difficult. And so I actually think that you're better off with the MST structure that they have. They've improved it considerably, and it's much more natural in terms of how the test works for you as a test taker. The computer adaptive test had you do 1 question at a time. You had to answer that before you could move on, and it would decide if you got it right. If it was a hard one, they'd give you another hard one, and they'd bounce you around in the difficulty level. But it was very difficult as a test taker because you couldn't go back. You had to answer it before you could move on. The new test is multi-stage test, and you can move around within the section that you're in. So if you're in a verbal section, you can go back and forth. And so what I want to do is show you a little bit of what the test looks like so that you can get familiar with it. This is on the Kaplan CD. So if you do get a hold of a Kaplan CD, you have to get the newest one. The old Kaplan CDs will not have this because it just started in August. Old Kaplan books can be good for other things like the vocabulary set, so if you can get a hold of a cheap one, go ahead and buy one, but just realize that the DVDs and the test types will be different. All right, this is what's on the CD, and they have both verbal reasoning and quantitative reasoning. I was already in here, which is why I'm retaking it. You can either do a timed or an untimed. I'm going to click on the timed. It gives you the basic directions. You should not have to spend time reading directions on this test. That's the point of a standardized test. The directions will always look the same. So practice enough so that you don't have to read any directions and waste your time on that. Once you're comfortable, you continue. You can see at the top it's a fairly user-friendly set of buttons. Here's what they look like. This is a verbal question. It's a fill-in-the-blank, basically. You have vocabulary options down here, and you can click on it. I'm just going to pick, I think this is the one, I'm sorry. Falsified. Okay. OB lied, sorry. Sorry. See, you can choose, you can pick, you can change your mind about what you're doing. You can also, and this is important, you can mark these. So if you're not sure of one, you can just mark it, answer it, mark it, and move on. You go to the next question, mark another one, you're not sure about it, mark it. Then you can click on what's the review button, and it gives you a list of all of the things that you've already answered. If they're marked, those are the ones that you can go back to. You can click on this one or this one, and you can go to question. It will take you to number 1, and you can change your answer at that point, and then you can go back into the sequence, right? And you don't have to answer one. You can go to the next question. You can leave it blank, and then when you go to review, it will say not answered. So this is your way to keep track. Now this is a benefit because you can kind of track where you are and you can go back if you need to, but it can also get very distracting. So make sure that you're not wasting a lot of time checking what you did and checking where you are and moving around and using that time. You'll notice that when you're on this page, it doesn't show you the clock. If I go back, there's a timer up here, and that is what you will have. You can hide it if you're the kind of person who gets very anxious when the countdown happens. You can hide that, but just realize that it's there for you and you should budget your time. The benefit of review is it tells you how many questions you have left, so you can keep track of where you are in the question sequence. It is best to get as many answered as you can. So if you're running out of time, go through the last really quickly and at least guess. There's no penalty for guessing on this exam. So you need to answer as many as you can. So don't ever leave a section with blanks in it. There's no reason to do that. Budget your time well enough to put an answer down for everything, okay? So there's a lot of user-friendliness in this, but there's also a lot to pay attention to. It's not just a piece of paper with some circles to fill in. You're maneuvering and you're going back and forth. So that's why practicing with this is so important. You need to be comfortable and familiar so you're not sitting there thinking, okay, where's that button? How do I see what I did before? Don't waste your time that way. It's a standardized test. Every screen will look exactly like this. Right? So that's the real benefit of it. Do not hit exit set. If you hit the exit set button, it will kick you out and the scores will not count. So only do that in case of extreme emergency, right? Like now. And see, in this one, in the Kaplan, it will actually give you explanations for all of the answers, and it tells you which ones that you got right. And there are 10, I think 10 sets in this, and there are 10 quantitative. All right, so it can be very useful to have that. Also, if you go to the GRE website, this one, oops, sorry, the GRE website, There is also, I think, a practice exam here. There used to be. I thought I just found it. Well, let's go. It's the revised general test. There's a whole lot of buzz about the fact that it's a new format test, very different from the old format in some ways, but similar in others. In other words, it's still heavily vocabulary based, but now they're putting them in sentences instead of just giving you lists with analogies and antonyms. So they describe it. They have the registration is there and available. And then they have, let's see, they have a list of MBA programs that accept GRE scores because, as you know, MBA programs are usually looking for the GMAT. So realize if you're taking this exam, you should make sure that the institutions you're interested in applying to actually take the GRE. You should also check with them to find out what they expect on the scoring. So a couple of other features. Know that there's also a limited calculator available in the quantitative section. This is new. There did not used to be one. So the idea is that you should not now have to make kind of crazy errors just in basic arithmetic. On the other hand, it means their focus is going to be more conceptual and less sort of basic math related. So you need to realize that there's a trade-off. Having the calculator might be great, but the kinds of questions they will ask will be a little bit different as a result. It's the equivalent sort of having an open book exam versus a closed book exam. You want the open book, but at the same time you know that it's going to make the questions different. At the end of the exam, you will have an opportunity to cancel your scores. So if you get through that exam and you have a feeling that you did very poorly for some reason, you can cancel the exam. However, I and Kaplan strongly discourage you from doing that unless you have a really good reason. If you know you didn't answer a bunch of questions or you just felt ill and you weren't concentrating at any level, maybe cancel. But people have a tendency to remember the bad stuff when they're taking exams. So you get to the end and you think, oh, I think I got 3 of them wrong, and oh, I had a hard time on that section. I don't know if I did that. You have no idea. Honestly, it's very hard to know in certain cases. So realize that you may not be the best judge of whether you did well or not, and it might be better for you just to accept the scores. It's your risk, of course, and you need to decide what happens to the scores. If you cancel, nobody will see any scores, including you. You will not have any idea how you did on that exam. So it's not like you can cancel it and still find out how you did. You won't know either. But what happens is when you get your score report, there will be canceled tests. So nobody else will know what you got, but they'll know that you took it. The challenge here is that they've changed the retest option. You used to be able to retest much more quickly, but now you have to wait 60 days to take the exam again. So if you're on a deadline for applications, you might want to think far enough ahead so that if you think you need multiple test options, you got to plan pretty far in advance. Sorry. The other issue is that if you do get the scores, you can have them sent to institutions of your choice. So when you go into the exam, make sure that you're prepared and know which institutions you want to send them to. If you take the GRE multiple times and you have multiple scores, you should find out from the institutions to which you're applying how they treat that. Occasionally the schools will average your scores, but in a lot of cases they will take the best score that you have. But you should find out from them whether they have any perceptions or any attitudes about multiple scores and how they handle them. Okay? Also realize that the other thing to find out, if you're applying, for instance, to a math program or a science program, you may assume that they only care about the quantitative section. They may not. They may look at all the scores. So be sure that you understand which scores are meaningful to the places that you're applying. Because the analytic writing sometimes is critical even though you're going into a field that you think is mostly quantitative. They look at all of those because it's one way to distinguish candidates. And when you're in graduate school, you have to write. You have to use verbal reasoning skills. It's not just about math. When you're in a writing program, you have to look at things like statistics. And so you need to understand math just as well. But different programs treat the scores differently. Some will say, we don't really care about the quantitative section. Some will say, we don't really care about the verbal section. Okay, you can give yourself a little break in those sections. But I would say try your best on all of it. There's no reason not to do if you're going to pay to take this exam, which you have to do, and you're going to sit there for 4 hours, you might as well try to do your best and have it on your record that way. All right, does anybody have any, oh, one more thing about scratch paper, sorry. You also have scratch paper because realize this is still on the computer and some people are still more used to paper and pencil options. So you will get scratch paper. My understanding is that you will get one piece of scratch paper and if you want another piece, you have to trade it in. Right? You can't just go get more. It's just kind of a strange feature, but I just thought I'd point that out because it struck me as a little bit odd also. All right, does anybody have any questions about the exam structure? Yes, can you please push the, the question, never mind. The question was, how much does it cost? I think, I could be wrong about this, I think it costs about $160. Yes, is that people are nodding? So $160. This is not a small investment of time or money. So be sure that this is something that you need for your graduate application. Make sure this is something that you are prepared for because it really is quite a large undertaking. Right? Sorry? Are you going to use this? Yes. Yes.
I'm going to hand out the books.
So Dr. Sika is going to hand out the Kaplan book.
But please don't write in it and don't pull out the CD because we're going to make these available in the library for people to use.
Yes.
Right now this is just for your reference.
Right.
We'll
And
start handing them out.
we'll do a little practice later, but I have practice pages for you.
And you've
Okay.
got to, you have to turn it in to me when you leave.
All right. Any other questions? Yes. No, that's the microphone button.
Oh. So if we
Push the button. Yeah.
So if we're to buy it, it's 160. But is it? I mean, we can practice, and it's not recorded. We can practice as much as we want. I mean, we can take that test every day if we wanted to, until we're comfortable with it or not.
No. The only practice that you can get is either through something like a Kaplan CD. There are a couple others. I think Princeton Review also does a GRE. So there are different GRE preps out there, and they will provide practice exams. On the GRE website, and I was just looking, I thought I had seen this. They usually have one, here we go, prepare for the test. They usually have one practice. They have a quick review of the question types, and then they have some tips, and then they have download the practice book. There's a math review, so they have some resources, but I believe that there's only one online practice exam. So there's no place that you can go and just kind of take tests over and over and over again that I'm aware of.
If you go on the Kaplan website, they have free events in your area, and they're online classrooms, and they have free tests, and they have free classes.
Oh,
So
that's
yeah,
great.
You don't have to pay anything for Kaplan. Just go in and put your zip code in, and it's free online.
For some of it. They'll give you a limited review. They're not going to give you their whole deal because they want you to buy
they're
it.
very short classes.
Yes.
So this is really your review.
Yes. I would recommend a book, and we'll talk through it. Dr. Kemse Tong is going to talk about the reading comprehension as well as the analytic writing sections, and then I'll talk about the verbal, and Dr. Hodges will get recorded to do the quantitative. But it's really just a lot of prep on your own time, I think. Kaplan can tell you how to do it, but I think the point of going to the classes for Kaplan is if you're the kind of person who's not doing it on your own. If you can motivate yourself to do it, you don't have to pay the hundreds of dollars it is to get one of the formal review classes. Yes, another comment?
Okay, I have a question. For the online thing for Kaplan, I get those emails a lot. And do you get the scores right away? Because I heard that when you do it, the one in school, you don't get it right away.
So
I'm not sure yet. I haven't taken an exam yet. There's
All right, so
classes that they do in the evenings.
So the question is about whether Kaplan scores, you get the scores back right away if you do an online?
For the
free
exams?
exams.
I haven't taken one yet.
And we don't know that? Another comment?
Yeah,
Yes?
I guess I can answer that. Yeah, I have, because I take that test once a week.
Uh-huh.
And you get kind of like a range of where you might score. You don't get an exact score. You just say your range from like 680 to 740 or 700 to 760.
All right,
so
they give you a range.
From what you've done in the computer.
All right. So you get a range of where you fall. Realize that the new scoring system is no longer going to be 600 to 800. It'll be in the 130 to 170. Right. They're still doing the older version. Yeah. So don't get panicky if you get a number that seems lower than what everybody's talking about. If somebody says, oh, I got a 700 on the GRE, and you say, I got a 150, don't get nervous. They've figured out how to scale the scores, and they will help people know how to compare the previous system to the new system. That's all prepared out there. Okay, so are there any other questions about the structure? I cannot emphasize enough how important it is to be comfortable with the test structure. That is your primary advantage on a standardized exam like this. There is no question about what it will look like. There's no question about how long it takes, what the questions look like, where the buttons are, what the calculator looks like, what you need, what materials you can have, which ones you can't have. That's your strength. Right? That's the best thing you can do for yourself, is be incredibly comfortable with this. Right? Okay, then let's go ahead and move on to the verbal section. There have been some changes since the original exam that had been around for many years. They had been touting this new system for a long time, and they finally come out with it starting, I think, in August. The criticism of the old exam had to do with the fact that it was heavy vocabulary. And the vocabulary was decontextualized. In other words, it was just you and a list of words. One section was an antonym. They would give you one word, and they give you a list of 5 and say, pick the opposite. And then they would give you what they call analogies, where they'd say, bird is to nest as cat is to blank. And you're supposed to pick what makes the comparison accurate. But once again, it's fairly pure vocabulary, and they don't use words like bird and cat very much. So the new test is explained as being more contextualized. So what you have now is essentially a bunch of fill-in-the-blank sections in the verbal. There are 3 sections: text completion, sentence equivalence, and reading comprehension. That totals 20. There may be slightly different numbers of questions in each section, but approximately 6 text completion, 4 sentence equivalent, and 10 reading comprehension. So that's generally the distribution of the questions. Heavier focus on the reading comprehension. And the reading, something to keep in mind, and Dr. Kemsai Tong will talk about, the reading has to be done on a screen. So if you are not comfortable reading on a screen, you need to start practicing that, because that's where you're going to have to get the information. So the key issue to the 2 sections that I'm going to talk about, the text completion and the sentence equivalence, is vocabulary still. It's still based in your knowledge of words. What we know about the words that they choose for the GRE is that they tend to be very broad. There's a very broad vocabulary. It's very literary. In other words, if you are a reader of literature, that is where a lot of the vocabulary comes from. It's much less scientific, less based in the other fields. So realize that it's still kind of a heavy humanities base. The vocabulary can often be archaic or uncommon. They're not out to find out if you just read the newspaper yesterday. That's kind of not their focus. It's a much deeper and broader and less frequent vocabulary. And they don't necessarily use the most obvious meanings. Even if the word looks familiar, they may not use the meaning that you are most familiar with or that is most common today. So you need to build flexibility into your understanding of vocabulary. You need to know a lot of vocabulary, and you need to be flexible about how you see that vocabulary. Now, the benefit is, on the GRE, vocabulary does not have to be known at a very specific level. So a lot of people think, oh, I'm going to have to memorize a bunch of definitions. I would encourage you to move away from that particular approach, especially if you're cramming. Right? Now, if you're a person who reads a lot, you may have a deeper knowledge of the vocabulary and their meaning, and that's great. The more deep your understanding can be, the better off you will be. But if you need to get a lot of vocabulary in a shorter period of time, what you want to focus on is knowing a little bit about a lot of words, and there are ways to do that. Kaplan has some helpful tools, and we'll talk about some other features of acquiring vocabulary. But something I just want to point out, our vocabulary in English is mostly not English. A lot of it is borrowed from Latin and Greek. However, also as just a point of interest, sorry, let me go back over here to this. English is one of the Indo-European languages, and so we are part of a large family tree of languages. A lot of people think that English came from Latin or came from Greek. That is not true. We simply have borrowed. About 85% of our vocabulary is borrowed. English is in the Germanic branch, so we are most closely related to Germanic types of languages. You'll see that Latin is over here on another family branch, and Greek is over here on another branch of the family. And is this relevant to your vocabulary building? Technically, no, but it is helpful to know that Latin and Greek drive a lot of our vocabulary. And so one of the big study focuses for you can be learning roots. You've probably heard about word roots. A lot of them come from Latin and Greek. And so one of the advantages if you're in the sciences, there actually are a lot of roots in the vocabulary there. So if you can build from that, that can help you in the other kinds of vocabulary that you will need. So that's sort of an FYI, fun facts to know about English. All right, what you have then on the handout in section A on page 2 is a list of the most popular vocabulary words. This has been compiled by Kaplan by studying all kinds of exams over and over and over again. So just scan that quickly and see if anything looks familiar to you. right? There are about 12 in that first list before the set of asterisks. Mark the ones that you know. Okay, so how many of you knew all of them? Anybody? How many are there? 2, 4, 6. How many know 11? 10? 9? 8? 7? 6? 5? 4? 3? 2? 1. Okay. This is a vocabulary list that you should come to love. My guess is, and Kaplan's guess is, that you will have one of these probably on your exam. Of course, what will happen now is you'll walk in and you won't have any of them on your exam. But they're good words anyway. They're very useful vocabulary. And if you want to go to graduate school, it's helpful to have breadth of vocabulary. You're going to have to do a lot of difficult reading. So realize that your vocabulary building is not merely for the test. This is something that will serve you well as you move through your future studies and in general reading and life opportunities. But so let's look at tips for learning vocabulary. How do you acquire vocabulary if this is not your strength? This is in section B. I think it's on the next page. First of all, learn your words in word families. What does that mean? Kaplan has some great lists, which is why I would recommend go and buy a cheap old version of Kaplan because they should all have it. But what that means is that if you learn a bunch of words together, and you know one of them, then you know generally what the other ones mean. So for instance, beginner or amateur. This is the category of meaning. The words are dilettante, fledgling, neophyte, novitiate, proselyte, and tyro. If you know one of those words, you know the other words. So if you can learn them in groups, and Kaplan has them separated for you in groups according to, so abbreviated communication. Abridge, compendium, cursory, curtail, syllabus, synopsis, terse. My guess is you know the word syllabus. Yes? So if you know that, then the other ones also become more familiar. That's a very good way to learn bunches of vocabulary more quickly. Because in a lot of cases on the test, you don't need a precise definition, you need a general sense. So for instance, in the test sentence equivalence, you're going to have to choose 2 words that mean the same thing to complete the sentence. So you're basically looking for synonyms. So if you know one, it can help you out, right? All right, the other key to learning vocabulary is to learn it in context, because we learn vocabulary that way. We do not sit down and study the dictionary. That's not how we learn vocabulary. And if we hear a word that we don't know, sometimes we look it up, but a lot of times we just hope the person will use it again in another sentence so we can figure it out. Or maybe you'll hear it another time and you'll think, oh, that's what that word is. We acquire meaning through context. That is the most natural way to do it. So what I would recommend is to try to learn your vocabulary in context. So for instance, those top 12 GRE words, look them up, Google them. Right? Don't look them up in a dictionary. Dictionaries are going to give you a definition, and definitions, you're going to try to remember the definition, but then how do you use the word? It's better to extract general meaning from a context. So everybody pick one of those words on the top 12, if you don't, one that you don't know, and Google it. Okay, has everybody Googled one? Yes? Okay, so somebody tell me what word you picked and read what you got on Google. Just a sentence that has it in it, and make sure you push your microphone button. Anybody want to volunteer? Oh, Dr.
Push the microphone, keep pushing it as you're talking.
Oh, push and hold it, yes. the little light should come on. Okay, go ahead.
I picked a sewage, unless I'm not pronouncing it right, and a sentence would be, to assuage his fears, to assuage her anger.
Okay. Other examples? What else do we have? Push the button, hold it.
I also chose assuage, and it says assuage the guilt of wrongdoing by doing right.
Okay. So based on that, what do you think that word means? Assuage. Any ideas? Any glimmer?
Oh, to relieve.
To relieve, to help out, right? When you're doing your Googling, you all have different interests. Some of you like mechanics, some of you like history, some of you like nature. Find it in contexts that are of interest to you, right? So skim the Google list until you find something that looks interesting, and then read the sentences. Read 2 or 3 sentences, do it quickly, don't obsess about it. Just try to do that on a regular basis, and that can help you build vocabulary more naturally and maybe in a little bit more interesting way. If you can get the words into contexts that are interesting to you and make sense to you, you will retain them better. All right, a couple more examples. What do we have? Any others? Anybody have any others? Yes, okay, we have one over here, and then we'll go back to it. No, go ahead. Yeah, push the button and hold it.
I have erudite.
Okay. All right, go ahead. A little temporary. All right, you said you had erudite?
Oh, do I need to give a sentence?
Read the sentence, yes.
An erudite professor teaches. I don't know. I didn't find a sentence. I was looking for.
Oh, okay. What's a synonym?
Great, characterized by great knowledge, learned or scholarly.
Oh, okay. There you go. Erudite.
With this computer, I'm not doing anything.
Maybe down on the bottom. Yeah. Yeah. It's a lovely sort of distraction, right? It's Saturday morning. We all need a little bit of a break every once in a while. All right. So I would use this technique. If you don't like Google, you can Bing, whichever search engine you like. You can Yahoo it, whatever you want to do. But again, try to look for the vocabulary in areas of interest to you, and that will help, I think, quite a bit. All right, point number 3 there. Knowing a little bit about a lot of words is better than knowing details about few words. This is where you need to bulk up at the broad level rather than delve in at the specific level. Basically, getting even a sense of whether it's a positive or a negative word can be helpful, right? Because it kind of plus or minus. So a word like dissonance, would you say that that is a plus word or a minus word?
Minus.
A minus word. Why? Dis, right? We're going to talk a little bit about word parts and why that's useful information. What about apathy? Plus or minus? Minus. Why? The A at the beginning can be helpful. So we're going to talk about word parts and why knowing those can be helpful for you. But getting a sense of whether it's positive or negative alone is a good idea. So maybe on that list of the top GRE words, you just want to go through and put a plus or a minus next to them. Not every word has a polarization. They're not all pluses and minuses, so realize you can't always apply that, but a lot of times that can be helpful information. Pay special attention, as we just talked about, to the words on the top list. Those are important ones and they're frequent on the exams. Read higher level general periodicals like the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, or the Atlantic Monthly. These are the kinds of publications that use bigger vocabulary, more GRE-like vocabulary. A lot of the magazines, the popular magazines, are written to a different target audience. These are the ones that maintain the vocabulary that would be more useful to you. So if you can interest yourself in something like this, I would encourage you to do so. The New York Times is free online. You can, of course, go and read it. You can also subscribe to it, and they will send you links every day to their articles. So you might consider doing that, especially if you're prepping for this exam. Number 6, the ETS, that's the Educational Testing Service that runs a bunch of these standardized exams, uses secondary meanings of words, so don't always assume the obvious. You need to develop flexibility in thinking about how words work, and we'll talk about some examples in a minute. Do not eliminate words you don't know. You have to be honest with yourself. Just because you don't know it doesn't mean it's not the answer. So as you're going through and using your test strategies, crossing out the ones you know cannot be true, Don't cross out ones if you don't know them. It's very tempting to say, I don't know that word, I'm going to ignore it. You can't do that. You need to look at all the possibilities and then choose from those. Okay? Learn about word parts and parts of speech, and we're going to talk about that right now. One other place that you can get vocabulary, Rachel just informed me that there's a vocabulary app, at least on the Droid.
On the Android browser on my phone, Kaplan, it's a Kaplan vocab that every day, you know, when you're
right.
you can go through, and it has 3 different levels, and you can mark which ones you got right and which ones you got wrong, and then you can star them, and so it builds a list for you of
right.
words you need to work on.
Right. So it's the Kaplan vocab GRE flashcards that you can get as a free app, and there might be one. There probably is one for other phones and probably on your computer and all that kind of stuff. So that's something else to check out. But you want to make sure that they are kind of the GRE targeted words, because if it's the Kaplan, they have selected those vocabulary items for a reason. It's not just a general vocabulary list. All right, any questions about basic vocabulary building? We're good. All right. All right, word parts and parts of speech. This is a key to also building lots of vocabulary quickly, because words have roots, and roots then get built on by adding or subtracting prefixes and suffixes, which are generally called affixes. So understanding parts and how words can be broken down, if you can pull out a part of it and get a general sense of what that means, it gives you some hint about the word. It may not be enough sometimes. There are limitations, but it's something. Rather than looking at a list of words and thinking, oh my gosh, I have no idea what any of these are, you at least have a way into some of them. And it increases your comfort level on the exam, which is very important. All right, so words are made up of smaller parts called morphemes, right? Little bitty word parts. So for instance, a word like laudable, okay, and let me figure this out, hold on. I have a way to do this. So laudable. Make this bigger. Okay, you can't see that because I don't have that up. All right. Ha, ta-da. All right. Sorry, the magic screen. This word laudable. How many word parts are in it? 2. What are they? Laud and able. Which is the root? Laud, right? What does able do to the word? It means that you can do it, right? It changes the part of speech slightly. But you recognize that there are 2 meaningful units, and if you can understand what those parts can do, it can help you. One of the things that's useful on the GRE is to know parts of speech. So to know if a word is a noun or an adjective or a verb is useful because if you are, for instance, choosing synonyms, you must choose 2 that are the same part of speech. If they're going to fill a blank in a sentence, they have to be the right part of speech to fill that blank. So you do not want to choose as your pair an adjective and a noun. You also want to know whether words can be verbs or adjectives or nouns or adverbs. And sometimes, once again, this is where the flexibility comes in. You see a word like this one. What part of speech is that? Now, everybody says noun, right? Can it be any other part of speech? It can also be a verb. You can knife someone. But we don't think of that right away, and so you might eliminate it and say, oh, that's not a verb. I'm looking for a verb. You have to be flexible in the way you approach it. And so we're going to talk about some tests, quick tests that you can do to decide whether a word can be a verb or a noun or an adjective, and make sure you consider all of your options on that. All right, what about the word, this word? Oops, sorry. This one. How many word parts? 2. Right? What does, and that double L is mostly a spelling issue because you have to double it when you add the IZE. What does the IZE do for the word? Changes it into, from what to what? What part of speech is crystal? A noun. What part of speech is crystallize? It's a verb. Okay? IZE makes verbs. So if you look at a word and you don't know what it means, you might not know the root, but IZE will make it a verb, generally. Okay? ABLE will make it an adjective. So if you can just know those, at least you know you're picking the same part of speech. If that's all you got, at least it's something. What about the word, this word? Oops. Keep doing that. It's a verb. How many word parts? How many morphemes would you say are in that? 3. What are they? In. Crimin, right? Crime.
Another one, and criminate. That makes it a. I mean, the 8th part makes it a verb.
Yeah, it's a little messy. And the beauty of this is you don't have to worry about the details of where the breaks are. You're just looking for the chunks of stuff. And if any chunk helps you, you're in better shape than you were before. So don't get bogged down in the weird spelling things when you drop letters and you add letters to make these. Just look for parts. Something in there, the ATE, makes it a verb. What does in do?
Makes it.
The ones at the front will not change the part of speech. If it's a prefix, they don't change the part of speech usually. Usually only the suffixes can do that. So incriminate, what does the in mean? We have 2 ins in English actually. So we have this one and we have this one. What does the in intolerable mean? Not, right? What does incriminate mean? Because the in this one does not mean not. It does not mean not criminate. Right? It means embed. So we also have an in. It's in a word like inbred. Right? What does that mean? Inside of. So 2 ins in English. One means not, one means inside. Right? So the incriminate one means it's the internal one. Right? All right. Second bullet there under C on page 2. I think we're on page 2. Breaking down words and learning about parts can be helpful in constructing the meaning of the words you may not recognize. Right? This is what we were just talking about. So a word like distasteful, which you have there on the handout, has how many parts? 3, right? Dis, taste, and full. What does the dis do? Means not. What does the full do? Makes it into an adjective, right? You're like, well, it means inside, whatever, stuff. There's stuff there, right? Yes, okay, that's fine. Again, don't get bogged down in the details and the specificity. Just get something out of it. That's what you want to do because you're going to have to do this fairly quickly on the exam. Okay, let's talk about parts of speech. As I said, it's important for you to know which parts of speech words can be because you want to at least make sure you're filling in the blanks with the right part of speech. There are some very quick tests for parts of speech. Things that we know about nouns, verbs, adjectives, and adverbs. For instance, nouns have plurals. No other part of speech has a plural. Most nouns make plurals with what? S. Not all of them. We have irregular ones, so don't get freaked out and start adding S's to things that you wouldn't normally do, like child. Nobody goes around saying childs, so don't do that. Right? Children would be the plural there. But trying to make it plural, so for instance, if we go back up to distasteful, can that be a noun? Does it have a plural? Distastefuls? No, there's no such thing. So probably not going to be a noun. Right? That's it. It's a quick check. Don't overthink it. Just kind of try it. What about intangible? Can that be a noun? Intangibles? Can be, right? The intangibles of this discussion will stay with you forever. Right? This is where you want to kind of be flexible. Don't get bogged down and fixated. Concurrent, can that be a noun? No, concurrence does not exist. Right? Another check, if that one is a little hard or it doesn't work in a certain case, nouns make units with the. Right? So the distasteful sounds weird. Right? But the intangible, not as weird. Right? Cat, very easy, the cat. Right? The desk, the cow, the exam. They all make units. If it's not a noun or possibly a noun, it won't make a unit with the. Right? The happy doesn't work. It's very strange. And your ear knows that. Right? If you've been working with English long enough, then your ear will be familiar with what sounds natural and what doesn't. And naturalness is really helpful in these tests. All right, verbs. Any word that can be a verb in English has an ing shape. Any word that can be a verb in English has an ing. So again, distasteful, can that be a verb? Distastefuling? No. What about intangible? Intangibling? It's a little weird. Concurrenting? No, all very strange. But a word like, let's see, what did I have before? What about dissonance? Can that be a verb? No, dissonancing doesn't work. What about crystallize? Crystallizing. See? Poof! That's how it works. If it's a verb, it can have an ing shape. Does it fit in a blank? These are what we call frame tests. There's a blank, and you put the word in it, and you say the sentence out loud, and if it sounds okay, it can be a verb. So they must crystallize. They must crystallize something. It actually sounds good in both of them. Distasteful, they must distasteful. They must distasteful something. They distasteful good doesn't work. Right? So if you can memorize those three, it only has to fit in one of them in order to be potentially a verb. It doesn't guarantee that it's a verb. It means it can be a verb, because it could also be a noun, like knife, right? Knives, there's a plural form, but you can also say they must knife something. That's how you can get your brain to think outside the box. Right? Adjective, we have another frame test. I use the noun cow. You can use whatever noun you like. Cow is my favorite one. So distasteful, for example. Your distasteful cow is very distasteful. Right? Sounds fine. Your laudable cow is very laudable. Right? But your crystallized cow is very crystallized. Sounds weird. Right? Because that can't be an adjective. So I've bonded with the cow. You can bond with whatever you like if you have a favorite pet. Whatever you want to do. I use cow. The other thing that we know about adjectives is that they take comparative forms, usually ER, EST, comparative superlative, or with more and most. So more laudable, most laudable, more distasteful. We don't say distastefuler, but the more most works. But crystallize, crystallizer, crystallize this, more crystallize, that doesn't work. So that's another check on adjectives. Realize, though, that that comparative also works on adverbs. Right? So just be a little bit careful with that one. Adverb, another check, is another frame test. The man told his story blank. The man told his story distasteful. The man told his story crystallized. The man told his story ephemerally. Yes, right? That one works. So this is a way to do a quick check to ensure that you know what part of speech you're working with and to know whether certain words in your list could be a part of speech you did not think of. Right? That's also very important. So a couple of examples. Let's think about these. What about this word? A-F-F-E-C-T. Would you say, what parts of speech can that be? A verb? How do you know it's a verb? Yeah, how do you know? Right. You can also use an infinitive to affect. ING, affecting. Right? Can it be any other part of speech?
Yeah.
Yes. An adjective, so what would prove it to be an adjective? What would the sentence be? Your affect cow is very affect, or your affect cow is very affect? Sounds a little strange, so probably not.
Could be a noun, though, right?
Could be a noun. What would make it a noun?
It comes from affection. There's
Affects.
there's
Now,
affect.
be sure that you are not confusing that with this. Right? Now, affect is a noun, but it's affect. The affect seems strange. It's a psychology term. So,
Does that come from affection, though? Affection?
I think they're related, yes. But realize, again, pronunciation can throw you off because these two words sound very similar. So make sure that you're thinking also of what it looks like in writing. Sometimes that helps. Okay? Realize that every time you can add an S, it doesn't guarantee that it's a plural. Make sure that the S you added means more than one, because there are S's for verbs also. Right? So make sure that the S, when you add it, and it sounds fine, means more than one on that word. What about position? What parts of speech?
That's a noun.
A noun because? The position. Sounds fine. What else? Any other? It can be a verb, right? They must position something, right? And mostly when you look at it, you think noun, but then you run the test and you realize, oh, it can be a verb. Knife we talked about. What about image?
It's a noun.
A noun. The image. Also a verb. Imaging, right? Which is actually more common as a noun now than it used to be. What about nice?
It's an adjective.
An adjective because the cow is the nice cow is very nice. Yes. Any other part of speech?
Adverb, nicely.
Nicely is the adverb. And this can also help you realize that in order for it to fit the blank, the man told the story nicely. You have to change it. That's a different word. Right? What about report?
That's a noun for sure, and it's a verb.
A noun for sure, and it's a verb. You want to be able to do this pretty quickly, right? You can't spend all day kind of checking. So this is another thing to practice with. Just pick words and pick the ones out of the list for the GRE, run through them, and see how they sound. And training yourself on that can just be helpful, okay? All right, any questions about acquiring vocabulary? All right, just some kind of quick checks. Play with language. The more playful and flexible you are with language, the better off you will be with this kind of exam. Because vocabulary, it's a big vocabulary, and as I said, they tend to choose slightly unconventional uses of the words. Right? They may not choose the most obvious one. Okay, let's talk about the actual types of questions you will have. Text completion and sentence equivalence. It's tempting sometimes to look at the answers first. But don't skip the sentence and go to the choices. Look at the sentence first. Find the clues. Most importantly, fill in your own word, right? Fill it in a way that you think makes sense, and then go to the list of options and see which one matches what you think it is. All right? That's a very strong strategy for taking the exam. It's pretty much the only one Kaplan has. For all of the new stuff, they basically say, read the sentence, think about what you would put in there, find the word in the list that matches, and then put that word back in the sentence and make sure it sounds okay. That's pretty much your strategy on that. There isn't much else you can do with fill in the blanks. They do point out a couple of things. Look for what's directly implied and expect cliches. They are not doing anything weird. The sky is blue in all Kaplan questions. Right? There's no sci-fi, there's no fantasy world. It's pretty much as basic as you can get. Right? Men wear ties, that kind of stuff. It's very cliche in that sense. I'm not saying that they're gender biased, but I'm just saying don't think outside the box with Kaplan, with the GRE. Okay? So that's what 2 and 3 say. All the clues you need are in the exam. You do not have to bring in outside knowledge about situations or your readings when you're doing the reading comprehension. Just because you know something about that topic, do not bring it in. Right? It's all right there. You may be the expert on crystallization, and if that's what that thing is about, it doesn't matter. Because somebody who knows nothing about that is still going to be able to answer the questions based on what they read in those 3 or 4 paragraphs. Same thing with the sentences. You do not need anything other than what's in the sentence and your knowledge of the vocabulary choices. That's all. Right? Look for signs in the sentences to determine the direction of a sentence. Because sometimes if you have 2 blanks, you're going to have to choose one for one blank and one for another. It could be that the sentence is in 2 parts and they're opposites. Right? They want you to contradict yourself. So you want the 2 words to be opposite types. Okay? Detour signs that say go in the other direction are words like even though, although, though, whereas, while, despite, however, unless, rather, unfortunately, nonetheless, yet, but, regardless, conversely. Right? Those all kind of send you, oops, we're going to go the other way now. Straight ahead ones that say maybe you're looking for synonym type words, and similarly, in addition, since, also, likewise, a semicolon. A semicolon signals shared information, thus, moreover, consequently. So look for those kinds of clues in the sentences that you have and then go from there. All right, before I hand you a sheet that has actual sentence types, let's just do a few kind of fill in the blank on what you think it is, and then I'll give you the options. So look at 1 through 4 in this practice text completion and fill in words that you think would make those sentences work. Okay, we've gotten through the first 4. Yes? Okay, let's talk about those. I'm going to give you some choices now. Right? Your idea was to pick a word. The strategy is to pick a word and then find one that matches it. So our choices are, these a little bigger. Lively, well-developed, predictable, complex, and creative. Does one of them match what you came up with?
Predictable for one.
Predictable? Yes. What other words did you come up with?
Straightforward.
Straightforward?
Yeah.
Okay. Anything? What else?
Common.
Sorry?
Common.
Calming?
Common.
Oh, common. Yes. Okay, good. All right. And so, poof, there it is. That's the one you pick. Then you put it back into the sentence. You want to make sure that it sounds okay. So, although a few of the plot twists in her novel were unexpected, overall the major events depicted in the work were predictable enough. Make sure you put it back in and try it, just in case there's something quirky. Okay? All right. Next batch. Oops. Complaining about, recipients of, dissatisfied with, paying for, turned down for.
I picked another word, but it would be B.
Recipients of? Does that work? Now, what in that sentence sort of told you that maybe you were looking for that kind of a word? What, did we have any of those word clues? Right. Notice that you have while X, only X, right? So you have eligible, right? While they're eligible, how many are actually getting it, right? It's not an opposite kind of issue, but complaining about doesn't make sense because the thing that you're trying to contrast with is eligibility. Complaining is not kind of an opposite of eligible, right? Dissatisfied with, also not, because that's an attitude, not a criterion. Paying for, possibly,
If you're receiving them.
right. Turned down for, also, that might be possible, okay? But when it says only, that tells you, right? So you're using those kinds of clues in the sentence to get a sense of where you're supposed to go with it. All right, number 3. Remake, provoke, celebrate, undermine, or control. What did you come up with? What do you think? Which words did you all come up with? Let's start with that.
I put effects.
Affects,
I put determines.
determines, sorry,
I would say
hinders.
control from there.
What was yours in the back? Decreases. All right, so which one seems to match?
Control?
Each of his employees often control, the mistakes of each of his employees often control the effectiveness of an organization? Undermine, right? That's why you have to put it back in the sentence. Don't just match yours and think you got it. You have to put it back in the sentence because there are subtleties of language that direct you in one way or another. Okay? So make sure that you consider your options fully. Okay. All right, last one. Langston Hughes' creative works were the highlight, not the blank of his writings. So right there we have not, right? It's a contrast. Creative works the highlight, what's the opposite of, or kind of the, another way to, the average?
Oh, wait. You can say the entirety.
What did you all come up with? What words did you come up with?
Oh, it is entirety.
Downfall, focal point. Okay, highlight and focal point, similar or different? Highlight means picking something out, focal point, picking something out. So we're looking for something different from that because of the not, right? All right, so if you look at these peculiarity, highlight, peculiarity, it's kind of odd. Product, not the product, but his creative works were a product, so that's kind of, that's not going to work. Initiator, we have nothing about time here, right? Average, with the entirety, right? Highlight one thing, entirety everything. Right? Yeah, yeah, something like that. That's why, once again, just because you came up with something doesn't guarantee that you have the right choice, but it's a way to think through the question, right? It means you've considered the meaning of the sentence, and that's really what you have to get at very quickly, all right? Okay, the last thing that we're going to do in this section then is a couple of practice. I have 5 questions of each type: sentence completion and text, what are they? Text, sentence equivalence and text completion, whatever, fill in the blank stuff of the 2 different kinds. And Dr. Sick is going to hand those out. I'm going to time you on it though. So
Don't start just yet.
don't start just yet. We're going to start with the text completion. And you shouldn't spend more than a minute or a minute and a half on these. So I'm going to give you 5 minutes to do the text completion. Make sure it's the side that says text completion at the top. Okay, are you ready? Go. 5 minutes. $90 seconds. $30 seconds, make sure you have an answer for each one. Okay. Again, reminder, you should only spend a minute to a minute and a half on each of these, ideally a little bit less time, and you're going to have to balance that out with your reading comprehension time, because that's where you're probably going to want to spend the bulk of your time if you can. So hopefully some of these will go very quickly. Do not waste time on ones that you are struggling with. Mark it and go on. Answer as many of the ones, go through the ones you know, right? The ones you're comfortable with. It's like any test-taking strategy. Do what you know first, and then come back and use the rest of your time on your other choices. All right, so first thing, it's important to read the entire sentence first, right? Do not look right at the answers. Make sure you read the sentences first, because as I'm sure you noticed when you get down to the 3 blanks, it gets a little overwhelming. You got to figure out what's going on in the sentence before you can even think about the options. All right, number 1. The young man always had to have the last word. He would rather be disliked than.
By elimination, I guess.
Right, so he had to have the last word, right, and that's your clue. He would rather be disliked than what's sort of not having the last word. Gainsayed. That's the first one. Praised is a little bit different. Notice that it's not, you're not doing the opposite necessarily of disliked, right? It's about what is the dislike about. You have to use the first part of the sentence in order to interpret that, okay? So in this case, A would be the best choice. Clearly selfish does not work because they're not opposite enough. Remembered, a little odd. Praised is a possibility, and I understand why you went there with that, but that's the distractor, okay? And different. That's not an opposite of disliked. So you do need something that's kind of a little bit opposite of disliked, but it also has to tie into the first part of that sentence. Having the last word is the real focus. All right, number 2. Big long sentence about giant squids. Elusive is the correct one. Okay. What did you all have that meaningful? I actually find a real, I'm not fond of this one because I don't think you can have an elusive quest. The quest is not elusive. It's the animal that you're looking for that's elusive. So I struggled with this one. But meaningful is not as precise. It could be meaningful to find it, but the quest is not meaningful necessarily. So that's the thing that you need to think about. Popular would also have been plausible, but then you're not getting at the fact that it's hard to find. All right, number 3, it's a double blank. Although situated in the same neighborhood, the little brick house seemed blank compared to the ornate, almost blank new house. So what are you looking for in those two? Similar or different? Opposites. And which one? And one of them has to match ornate, right? The second one. So blank number 2, ostentatious. What did you choose for blank number 1? Dilapidated, right? Because impressive is positive. Even if you don't know what dilapidated means, impressive and desirable are both positive, and you need them to not be. So that eliminates those 2 choices. Right? Number 4, the blank gave such an impassioned speech that the crowd seemed moved to blank. Orator. Okay, miscreant implies negativity, right? So even if you don't know the word, it's impassioned and it's a positive kind of thing. It's unlikely that you would choose that. Okay, and what did you choose for number 2?
Despair.
Gave such an impassioned speech. Impassioned is more invigorating, right? That's probably the context. So despair is going to give you the opposite sort of. Duress means what? I'm under duress, therefore I will do this test, but only because I'm under duress. Right? Ebullience, actually ebullience. I always say ebullience. I don't think that's it. I think it's, does anybody, wow. Anybody know this word? Ebullience? Ebullience? I don't know. Doesn't matter, you just have to read it, you don't have to say it. You can't talk out loud in the GRE anyway. So in this case, F is the best choice. It means the ebullience of the crowd meant that they stayed there for hours cheering and being excited. Right. Once again, if you're learning vocabulary, try not to learn the definition. It tends to stick less. How many times have you looked up the exact same word? Right? Because you don't remember the definition, but you remember meanings from how they're used. So that's your best bet. All right, number 5, you have 3 blanks. He was blank and, so you have a connector with and. So these 2, 1 and 2, need to be similar, okay, in tone or nature or something, referring to character. So what did you choose for blank number 1?
C.
C, volatile, because he's explosive. And the next one? F, ignoble. Virtuous is good and courageous is good. So you want, even if you don't know what ignoble means, it's the only choice that makes sense. Right? And the last blank, making his future as a politician suddenly creates a contrast. Seem precarious, right? Guaranteed is certainly not it. You probably could rule that one out, so you're left with 2. If you don't know what the other 2 mean, at least you've got a 50-50 shot there. The problem is you have to get them all right.
Oh, you gotta get them all right.
That is my understanding of the scoring. Yes.
So why couldn't it be A for part one? Because it's
Oh.
not.
Just explosive rude.
Explosive rude remarks. Indifferent means sort of not much affect, right? You're not doing much there. So volatile is more in keeping with the description of this person. Okay. All right. Let's do the next type of question. If you flip your page over, you will see that it is the what they call the sentence equivalence. This is where you need to choose two words that will make the sentence mean the same thing. So you're looking for synonyms, right? But make sure you read the question first, or the sentence first. Okay, go. 5 minutes.
You have to choose 2 words?
You have to choose 2 words. Choose 2.
Oh, 2 words.
Choose 2. Seconds. All right, you can see why it's important for you to read the sentence, because if you look at the list, you'll see that there are a couple of synonym pairs. So you need to choose the one that fits your sentence. All right, in number 1, she was unable to move her arm after the stroke. In addition, the stroke blank her ability to speak. In addition tells you you're looking for something similar. So what is the key in the first part? Unable to move, right? So what do you have that's going to parallel that? Impeded, letter C, and hindered. So C and E would be your choices, and you would click both of them on the exam. Okay, you have to answer, you have to have 2 of them in order to get credit for this. All right, letter number 2, sorry. Although the lab assistant openly apologized for allowing the samples to spoil, so although you get a contrast. So openly apologized, her blank did not appease. So what did we choose? Frankness and candor. This is where you have to be careful about the context, right? She openly apologized, and there you're repeating. Did not appease is the sort of opposite part. So her frankness, she was open, and candor. Those both mean that. Okay. Insincerity and falsehood, there's no indication that she was lying. She openly apologized. So if you choose those, that contradicts the open apology. Okay. And hesitation also sort of contradicts the openly part. Okay. All right, number 3. Afterwards, the late man's wife could not stop crying. Similarly, his daughter was very morose and doleful. B and F are the two. Abashed usually means something different. So if you say he had been in public many times, but his previous experience and embarrassment meant he was abashed in front of the group, right? So he was less, yeah. All right, but the other thing to remember is that you should cross out the ones you know cannot work. So overjoyed is not going to work. Lucid, probably not. It's not about whether you're able to function or not. And at least narrow it down. That's the other strategy always. Eliminate the ones you know it cannot be. So that if you're going to guess, you have a limited list. But also remember what we said. Don't eliminate it if you don't know the word. That's still on your list. All right. Number 4. Her last minute vacation was blank compared to her usual trips, which are planned down to the last detail. Spontaneous and impulsive. Yes. B and E. Okay. All right. Number 5, after staying up all night, she felt extremely blank. However, she still ran 3 miles. So you have a contrast. Running 3 miles. Lethargic, letter B, and D, sluggish. Right? Vigorous and energetic, clearly not appropriate. Rule those out immediately. Apprehensive, why would that be nervous? Right? Y'all, can we stay a little focused? All right. So, any questions about the verbal section? All right, it's vocabulary, it's fill in the blank. The overwhelming ones are probably the ones with 3, but realize you only have 3 choices in each of those. So it narrows it down a little bit, rule out what's not possible, and know the exam. That is really, really your best strategy. So I truly wish you the best of luck. And if you have any questions, my contact information, my email address is at the top of the handout. I'm happy to hear from you at any time. But it's a new format. People are pretty excited about it. I think you can do well, but just be prepared. That's really the key. All right, good luck. Have a great rest of the day.
Thank you.